Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to our webinar today. The webinar is covering how to protect and govern your data whilst using Microsoft Teams. This is a series of webinars that we are running showcasing both bluesource's capability alongside our partner Bytes. It covers off the journey to Office 365 in moving over to some of the rich feature capability that you have, specifically in this case around Teams. And what we wanted to do today is to run through both that, a detail around the agenda, and cover it off through. Now, this is actually a whistle-stop tour covering successful implementation, rolling out Teams both securely and compliantly. And we have a number of presenters on this session as well. Before I get into the presenters, I just wanted to send a special thanks out to our partner Bytes and really just go over a little bit of background on both that partnership and then also a little bit of a background on bluesource. So bluesource have partnered now with Bytes, and we're very proud to be one of the premier partners, rolling out a number of capabilities, primarily focusing around both the Microsoft Office 365 adoptions and most of the products within that, as well as some of the shift to Azure, moving various applications and workloads. Now, anyone that's new to bluesource, just a brief 100,000-foot view almost of our organization. We're a business that provide protection, governance, and management of unstructured data. Again, that's focusing more around your journey to things like Office 365, as well as the workloads within Azure, primarily shifting from anything from both data center or even traditional in-house. So on to the presenters. So I would love to say that we are joined in the room here at Bytes in their wonderful facility by VM Mercer. However, VM, unfortunately, like many of us, has been failed by the M25. Fortunately, we have the power of Teams assisting us. So I should have VM on the line. If you could just confirm you're there, VM.
Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. VM's actually sat just off the M25 in the services at Clackett Lane, I believe. So to know that he's able to connect and obviously to be coming through nice and clear is fantastic. So VM is a 20-year veteran in the industry, primarily around messaging and communication capability, and has worked with some of the largest financial and regulated organizations across the country and indeed internationally. We're also joined from Microsoft by Robert Jan-Gerets. Welcome along. He has actually managed to make it to the room as well, able to dodge the M25. Robert also, 20-year veteran, previously of Cisco, but for the last 10 years has been supporting the various different teams across Microsoft. So what I wanted to do now is just go into the agenda. Again, we wanted to keep it fairly free-flowing today. We're initially going to be kicking off with the teamwork and technology trends from VM. Again, sort of focusing on some of our experience already in what is, I wouldn't say relatively new, but definitely new in terms of sort of detailed onboarding on around Teams for our experience. We're then going to be moving over to Robert Jan, who's going to give us a little bit more detail around the enhancements of teamwork and productivity and some of the powerful elements that you find within Microsoft Teams. Then switching back to VM, covering the protect and govern section. This is again much more that focus around the data as you move it to the cloud, in this case obviously around Teams. And then we will be going into a real world demo, going into some of the authorization features and functionalities. So all that's really left for me to do, I think, is to pass it over to VM, and I'll take the slide through.
Thanks, Danny. And just to echo that, welcome along, everyone. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to set the scene for the rest of this webinar and talk a little bit about our experiences helping our clients with modern teamwork. So we're living more and more in a just-in-time world, and what I really mean by that is people expect to be able to do things, the tasks that they need, when they want, where they want, how they want, and using a device of their choice. We see this behavior change in the way that people interact with each other in their personal lives. It's no longer that common to plan outings with friends weeks in advance. The time to plan has reduced as that technology has enabled us to reach more people in a shorter space of time and in a more collaborative way. we all maybe jump in a WhatsApp group, or maybe we tag each other on Facebook, and we can quickly arrange a meetup. Okay, so what's the point of my story? Well, this behavior trend is finding its way into the corporate world, and people expect to be able to collaborate on the fly. And this is leading to business units within departments purchasing siloed collaboration tools, which actually may or may not have been vetted by the IT department for security or compliance. Many people out there may not appreciate whether data is sensitive, or they may believe actually the information that they're sharing to be innocuous, because, well, everybody knows this piece of information anyway, or what's the harm in sharing it? Things like a building ID or maybe a merchant number, depending on the organization you're in. But that's the challenge, because it's this seemingly innocuous information that skilled social engineering is looking for, to be able to blend in, move around inside your organization and collect the more sensitive data. So anyway, I'm not really here to talk about social engineering, so let's get back on track. Okay. We are seeing lots of disparate tool sets being used, some consumer grade and some enterprise grade, being stood up and utilized for team working across organizations. So in some cases, business units are influencing buying decisions and working with IT to deliver these tool sets, which is fine, but that does add more work for the IT department. They need to vet, they need to manage, they need to support a growing number of apps, and each department may need something slightly different. What's actually really eye-opening is that once you start auditing this behavior, in many cases, the business units are actually just bypassing IT completely, just expensing software on credit cards and just getting on and using those tools without any input from IT. So many of the most regulated organizations have lots of concerns over data residency. Maybe not all of these apps that are being used today for team working are able to comply with the data storage demands. That could potentially then expose the business to risk. Even if your organization is not highly regulated, is it really a good idea to be storing intellectual property in these consumer grade services? So why is all this change happening? Well, as much as we're seeing more and more need for just-in-time collaboration, we're also seeing a trend in smaller but more widely spread teams. And of course, the continuation of we all need to do more with less. And that means we're seeing more geographically dispersed teams and even cross-organizational team working, and that's just becoming the norm. So if the business is not providing the relevant tool sets, or even worse, if they do provide those tool sets, but they don't engage the user base on how to effectively use them in a secure and compliant way, we're going to start seeing this shadow IT creeping in, and of course the proliferation of silo collaboration tools across the org. As well as these points, we're also seeing more flexible working initiatives, and these are being implemented across lots of different organizations. This is relying on the technology to plug the gap where a physical office space used to be. Could be down to the demands of the people, but actually in some cases it's for cost savings around. So by introducing these flexible working initiatives, organizations can downsize their physical real estate footprint and still help to drive business productivity. And that's the ultimate vision, right? So hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea about modern team working and some of the challenges. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Robert Yan, who will be talking more about Teams itself and how that can help you enhance productivity.
Excellent, Liam. Thank you very much. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to give a quick summary of what the capabilities is within Teams. So let me start off with kind of the modern workplace, and actually all the ways that organizations now are changing the way they work. So if we compare ourselves to, let's say, 5 years ago, the way we work is actually, shifted a lot. So if you think about kind of how we look at mobile and social, if I look at the number of devices that people are using, then probably we see that 4 times as many devices are being used per user as we did, for example, let's say 5 years ago. Everybody will have a mobile, they will have a laptop, they probably even have like things like an iPad and maybe a second device, again as kind of a lab device. So there are quite a few different devices that users are actually using as their tools to socialize and stay in touch with their organizations. At the same time, if you look at kind of the workforce, we see also that if we look at the workforce today, compared, let's say, a couple of years back, then we see almost up to 5 generations sometimes working into a single kind of organization. And also that means when we are talking about trying to put a single platform together that allows us to actually collaborate and so on, we need to keep that in mind ways of working by the different generations, and how we actually facilitate older generations working with newer generations and the different modes of communication. And then last but not least is also the fact that, if you compare yourself with how many teams you were part of, let's say 5 years ago, then you're probably now many more times part of teams as you were before. I can think about the vertical team that I'm kind of part of in my own organization, as well as kind of the normal teams that we are part of. So we see that, the number of teams that people are collaborating with and actually communicating with has doubled as well. So from that perspective, we really want to kind of position Microsoft Teams as the hub for teamwork and allowing people to communicate, collaborate, use kind of third-party apps as well in kind of a single environment, but at the same time being able to say you can work in that kind of environment with confidence from a secure perspective as well. So what do our customers say? Well, a couple of kind of quotes here. First of all, customers are telling us that it really helps them to be more efficient by kind of using Teams for the ways of working they're doing. And also it seems to help them accelerate their decision-making process. So from that perspective, we can see that Teams actually is starting to make a difference. From a Microsoft perspective, Teams, as you can see here, is actually the fastest growing business app in Microsoft history. We have more than 500,000 organizations already using Teams. As you can see there, 90+ type of percentage of Fortune 100 companies are using Teams. And we've already kind of a couple of hundred organizations that actually have users from a 10,000 or even more active users using the platform to collaborate and communicate. So a very successful perspective from that perspective too. Now, when we actually try to position Teams within Microsoft 365, how do you communicate with kind of the rest of the organization? We actually kind of from a very high level try to communicate this picture. So meaning you have an inner loop, and I kind of apologize for the Americanism here, but the inner loop is really kind of when you talk about smaller teams, people try to interact with one another in kind of virtual teams and smaller teams, compared with, let's say, the outer loop where you want to communicate with the rest of the organization. For example, you want to do a town hall type of event, or maybe you want to kind of communicate a message out to the rest of the organization. But as you can see there, Outlook is still very much also one of the platforms that's being used by organizations to actually communicate. And just what I'm trying to get across from this picture is really that depending on what type of communication you're doing, you might want to use different types of platforms. And as I mentioned before, the Teams one is really kind of positioned to actually help communication and collaboration from the smaller teams and the vertical teams from that perspective. Now, I thought it would be useful to also very quickly show this diagram or this kind of picture in here about, when you are kind of communicating, collaborating, it sometimes really depends on who and what you're trying to communicate with the rest of the organization to be able to figure out what kind of platform is the best platform to use. So for example, if I want to, work on a document and actually it's very much for my own review initially, I maybe want to share it initially with maybe 1 or 2 people, then probably OneDrive is kind of the best place to do this. But as soon as we start talking about kind of team environments where I want to share or collaborate on specific documents within a kind of a team environment, then again, Teams is probably kind of the better way of doing that. And if you then actually start scaling up, maybe I want to have kind of a specific formal document, as mentioned here, or authoritative type file. I want to share it with the rest of the organization. Maybe you're looking at maybe using Yammer, or maybe things like SharePoint, or even a web portal. So the point I'm trying to make here really is that, depending on what type of files and documentation you want to share and who you are collaborating with, might actually kind of determine what type of platform you're going to use. Now, Teams, as I mentioned previously, it's kind of what we kind of start considering as the hub for teamwork. And actually, the good news is it's not kind of completely a new platform, right? When you think about Office 365 from years ago, it was very much known from Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so on. And actually, Teams is really built on top of the Office 365 suite of products that we already know and use. In this kind of collaboration kind of picture, you see also some other things kind of popping up. One of the services being mentioned here is Stream, and actually Stream is really important from a Teams perspective too, because whenever we kind of do let's say a meeting and we want to kind of record it, then actually it will end up as a recording within Stream. and actually you could access that meeting recording directly from Teams as well. So you can see that we are trying to actually leverage all the different types of services within the Office 365 and M365 suite of things to provide our end users with the best collaboration experience. Now, I'm just going to take a couple of slides to kind of take you very quickly through the different types of collaboration modes we have. So the first one obviously is chat, right? And chat has been around for a very long time. And what we have to try to do with Teams again is to make sure that whatever type of chat you would like to do, whatever kind of communication through an instant message you want to do, Teams could actually facilitate this. So whether it's kind of a one-on-one type of chat or a group chat, whether it's kind of a formal chat or an informal chat, whether you want to kind of put some GIFs in there, some emojis, etc. We have tried to kind of enable all these kind of different scenarios within Teams. If you then look at kind of the another mode of communication, especially kind of if you think about using the telephone, especially people that have been using Skype for Business in the past, or maybe even using it today. Calling obviously is a very important modality still out there for many organizations, and therefore very happy to really kind of articulate this here too, that whether you want to use kind of your own kind of whatever we call it, kind of telco or telephony provider by using Microsoft Direct Routing, or whether you want to actually make Microsoft kind of the telco of choice by using the Microsoft calling plans. Again, Teams will actually facilitate the use of phone and calling to be able to kind of communicate with the rest of the organization, internally as well as externally. So things like, for example, voicemail, auto attendance, even IVR capabilities, as well as kind of some more extensive, or I should say, more complicated type of functionality you sometimes find in telephony systems like call park and group call pickup and so on. Those are all actually being facilitated by using calling within Teams. The third kind of thing I want to mention about collaboration within Teams is actually the fact that we have actually made sure that we integrate obviously with all the Office 365 applications you are familiar with, whether that's SharePoint, whether that's, let's say, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and it's very easy to kind of communicate and even kind of together collaborate on a single kind of single kind of document. So whether you want to use that kind of from the application itself, or actually you want to kind of edit that within Teams, we have made sure that you don't actually have to swap or switch kind of applications to be able to do this. So within the Teams surroundings or kind of environment itself, you're able to edit those type of applications straight out of the box. So that's kind of the third one. And then the last one I really want to kind of quickly pay some more attention to is, of course, the whole thing about meetings. And if we think about meetings, I think everybody is very much aware that sometimes meetings take longer than planned. When you actually try to jump on a call, some people might be late, people might be joining not on time. There's quite often too many meetings, and also kind of a whole different set of tools that customers and end users are using to be able to kind of make the meetings as effective as possible. And kind of in that kind of circumstance, in that kind of environment, what we have tried to do again is to make sure that the meetings experience in Teams should be as optimal as possible. And that's really what I'm trying to talk about. So when you think about kind of the journey of a meeting, it's not just about having the meeting itself, right? You will always have kind of a before the meeting type of scenario where, I don't know, you're talking with your customer, your colleagues about a specific topic, you have some context, and then you decide, well, actually, let's jump on a call to maybe go in a little more detail. So kind of the insights, the history, and the deeper context is actually very important to be able to, in a way, leverage while actually having a meeting. During the meeting, obviously, we have the meeting, whether you want to share a PowerPoint presentation, maybe do a whiteboard session. And of course, after the meeting, you want to maybe share that recording with all the people that couldn't make it, or even look at the notes and actions that you actually captured during that meeting. And we believe that with Teams, we actually have been able to, even, although we had it in Skype for Business as well, to take this kind of to the next level. So first of all, when we talk communication through meetings within Teams, then we have kind of, again, tried to facilitate all the different scenarios we could think of. So whether that is kind of a formal meeting by actually setting up a meeting time and actually inviting a lot of different types of people to the meeting, or whether it's kind of an informal meeting where you decide on the spot, saying, hey, let's actually kind of quickly jump on a call and talk about things. This is really kind of all the different types of scenarios that we are trying to facilitate through Teams. So first of all, kind of what everybody's kind of used to when you talk about kind of a conference call, just like what we could do within Skype for Business. You can go into your Outlook calendar. You can say, hey, I want to set up a meeting, and automatically, as you would expect, it populates the email invite with the right URL, maybe some telephone numbers that you can provide to end users to say, hey, if you want to dial in through mobile, that's possible as well. So that's kind of the first and actually the normal way people think about setting up a meeting. The second one, and that's what I'm trying to show you here, is trying to kind of imitate the situation where I'm walking through the office. I see through some glass doors that, hey, I see a couple of colleagues of mine collaborating on a whiteboard. I would like to join that. And that's what I'm trying to show you here with this screenshot of a channel within Teams where we haven't talked about a specific topic and say, hey, guys, let's set up a meeting. We maybe invite 3 or 4 people to this meeting, but then maybe somebody else actually going through the same channel at a later moment in time and sees actually that meeting's taking place. And that looks interesting. I would like to join. So this is kind of, a slightly more informal and a much more kind of ad hoc type of scenario. But again, hopefully demonstrating to you that Teams can be used in either scenario. Now, obviously, when you join the conference call or the meeting, you should be able to kind of share a PowerPoint. You can actually use video, and that's what I'm demonstrating you here. Then while we actually have the meeting going on, quite often we would like to record the meeting. And if you remember the Skype for Business days, sometimes it wasn't really as kind of intuitive as we would like it to be. So quite often you had to take the decision, where am I going to store this recording? How am I going to kind of share this recording afterwards? And I'm very happy to report that within Teams, it actually happens all automatically. And this is coming back to the service that is called Stream that I mentioned initially, that we kind of leverage in the background to be able to do this. So if you decide to record a meeting, or if like a meeting like we do today with you guys using a live event, then the recordings automatically are being recorded within kind of the Stream environment, the Stream service, which is almost like a YouTube service for organizations. And then you can actually directly play it back from, in this case, a channel where we set up the meeting from. Now, the nice thing about with the recording that we're doing is we not only kind of record the meeting as you would expect, but we also actually provide a transcription of the meeting itself as well. So the first thing I would do if I actually missed a meeting is to kind of do a keyword search. So by actually transcribing the meeting, we actually are able to do things like keyword search. In this case, I'm typing in the word room, but actually, to be honest, normally I put in my own name to see if I actually picked up any actions myself. So that's another way of actually looking at how to leverage the transcription of a meeting. And then nicely, you can actually then jump straight away to the right point in the recording to figure out what type of action you picked up. Now, talking about kind of the calling side of things within Teams, as well as kind of the meetings within Teams using conference calling, etc., you would expect that you would need other devices to be able to actually do this. So whether it's a headset, a desk phone, a speaker phone, maybe kind of in a more formal organization type of room or a meeting room, a conference room phone, etc., we have a whole range of ecosystem. We have an ecosystem in place with a whole range of devices that gives you the choice to make sure that whatever type of device you're looking for, you can actually leverage that and use it with Teams. Now, the last point I want to kind of quickly touch on is the fact that, when we talk about Teams, we have mentioned this thing about intelligent communications. In the past, we normally used to talk about unified communications, and everybody's very much familiar with the term unified communications. But the reason that Microsoft started talking about intelligent communication is because we are trying and actually are doing a lot of inserting of AI within our services. And and the reason for actually putting AI into a service or a platform like Teams is to actually provide you with more insights, to help you to be more proactive, and also to adapt to certain situations much better. And so I have kind of quickly put together a couple of things that are in a way important to understand. So first of all, when you're talking about Microsoft 365 or Office 365 as a kind of a services suite, we have a lot of knowledge that we kind of gather in the background, whether that's through the use of Bing, whether it's through the use of the Office 365 service and so on. we actually are using kind of those kind of different types of signals, as we sometimes call them, and put them into what we call the Microsoft Graph. So whether that's kind of the world knowledge, maybe the organization knowledge that we can see by people using, for example, our services, or the individual knowledge, we have a lot of kind of different types of data and information coming through, which you then can actually leverage to provide kind of insights and help you to be more adaptive and proactive during, for example, meetings. So to kind of put it into reality, a couple of things I want to mention here. So the first one is about, let's say, you're trying to communicate with a colleague who's in a different country, and probably that person is actually trying to communicate in their own language. We now provide kind of out of the box inline message translation. So you can really communicate in your own language and actually translate it on the go while communicating with your colleagues across the world. The second thing I already mentioned is really kind of the recording transcription, right? So AI really allows us to very much provide a very good transcription and translation of the meeting recordings that we provide out of the box. So again, it's really kind of AI in the background that allows us to do this. The third kind of thing that being mentioned here is the kind of a feature that we have provided with Teams now, that we call the mobile companion mode. And what that means is you can actually have multiple devices within a meeting with you as the single user, and actually use this device while running a meeting. So for example, I'm actually joined in this meeting with a laptop, but maybe I would like to show, for example, a specific thing that I have on within the room here. So what I could do is I could actually open up my mobile, and automatically the Teams application within my mobile will actually realize, hey, Robert, you already kind of joined this meeting through the laptop. So please join this meeting with your mobile device, but we straight away out of the box mute and not only the microphone, but also, of course, the speakers. And what you can do then is you can actually say, hey, I would like to share maybe the video stream of my mobile in this meeting. And therefore, I'm still using kind of the voice, the audio and the video, sorry, the voice and the kind of PowerPoint presentation coming through the laptop, but then maybe switch to kind of share the video stream I have from my mobile. And so it's intelligent enough to realize that it's a single user using multiple devices in this kind of team setting. The fourth kind of example that we show here is the background blur. And I think most of the people on the call probably recognize this guy. He was one of the speakers at the BBC, and one or two of his kids actually crawled into the video stream. If he had at the time had background blur, meaning you'd be able to the capability of actually blurring the background while actually talking on a video stream, he wouldn't have probably been as famous as he is now. So that's kind of another thing that's being enabled through AI. And the last point here that I'm showing here is the whiteboard. So even if you are, for example, in a room where people are using kind of a traditional whiteboard, quite often the problem is that you can't actually see what the person is writing because, of course, he's standing or she's standing in front of it. By using, again, AI in the background and maybe multiple type of cameras, what we can do is we can almost kind of make that person transparent and actually allow us to still see what's on the whiteboard while that person is drawing it, while we are in a meeting. So a couple of examples how we actually have tried to infuse AI into Teams to provide the end user with more insights, be a little bit more proactive and more adaptive. With that then, VM, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah. So in this next section then, I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and best practice recommendations to deliver secure and compliant teamwork. So before we get going, I'd like to pose 5 thinkers to ponder over as we move through this section. So when was the last time you checked or audited if sensitive data was shared externally, either from your intranet or maybe your file servers, or maybe even through email? When was the last time you audited your proxies and firewall configuration? How are you reviewing where sensitive information is stored, both inside the corporate firewall and, of course, across those SaaS apps in the cloud? How are you ensuring that data is appropriately protected and retained and made available to compliance teams for discovery, and then, of course, disposed of at the appropriate time? And how are you detecting and containing lateral movement across your network? So the challenges we hear then, Microsoft Teams, as we've heard, is a highly flexible, integrated, collaborative solution. And this can benefit any team. However, there are some of the pain points that our clients are coming to us with. These are some of the pain points that our clients are coming to us with. So in some cases, these are just acting as blockers to the general rollout and adoption of Microsoft Teams. And actually for others who have already rolled out Teams, they're now retrospectively looking at how they're going to control some of that experience and some of those challenges. Let's remember that out-the-box configuration enables anyone to create a team. Now, this can lead to inconsistent naming conventions. It can lead to inconsistent experiences, and sometimes it can lead to duplication of teams. But why are we seeing duplication? Well, when teams are made private, they may not necessarily be searchable. And so a user may not know that a team already exists for that purpose, and so they create a new one and then manage the membership list separately. So Microsoft actually added the ability to make private teams searchable in the June update, so just last month. But actually, is this something that you should enable? Is it enabled already, or should you enable it for the organization? Maybe, maybe not. Then, of course, when someone creates a team, they become the owner of that team, and as such, they can delete the team and all the data within it. Now, of course, we can protect that data and put those controls around the data to ensure it is still discoverable, even if it's deleted. But the fact is, out the box, those protections are not in place, and so you do need to think about those to make sure that those governance concerns are adhered to. Further to this, we can also enable guest access. What I mean by that is external collaborators can come into our team and potentially now access sensitive information within those teams. So we need to control all of that. And then the last one on there, app overlaps, a little bit left field, but still related. This goes back to what I was saying about siloed collaboration tools. In some cases, IT has deployed multiple tools for specific features, and they overlap in some way, or many overlap in lots of ways. And so there may be a concern that enabling another collaboration tool is just going to confuse matters. Maybe it already has. And sometimes this leads to things like, we turned Skype on, now we've got Teams, people are just confused. And of course, we all know where that's going to end up, the path of least resistance. People will say, well, I don't use that tool, no one's trained me, I don't know how it works, I don't care, I'm just going to use email to send that document, or I'm going to WhatsApp it. We can worry about collating all of those versions later. So what I'm really getting at here is there is a pain of an inconsistent experience, a pain of inconsistent support. As how can we really expect the service desk to know and understand and support every tool set that business users have just spun up without the input of IT? And then, of course, all of these pain points are wrapped around that we don't necessarily know what data we have, we don't necessarily know where it's stored, and we don't always know who that's been shared with. So how do we start to address this? Okay. bluesource's answer to this is a 5-step program to deliver secure and compliant teamwork across the organization. We're going to dip into each of these areas in more detail, but at a very high level, assess your environment, your apps, your data, your infrastructure, the user stories, and the business cases. Secure your identities. We need to think about Active Directory, authentication methodology, the cloud app access, secure remote browsing, policies and platforms. Automate your team's lifecycle. So automating common business processes is going to drive standardization across those mundane tasks. It's going to leave people time to innovate. And then classify your data. I'm not sure I can stress this one enough. Classification of data is one of the most important and one of the most beneficial initiatives that an organization can undertake. We're going to look at that in a bit more detail later on. And then finally, engage your users. So onboarding a new tool set and training users is and always has been very important. That's not really what I'm getting at here. What I mean is really engage them from the start of the project through developing those business user stories, awareness campaigns, the ongoing security awareness training, and of course, feature and data champions. So let's dip into these in a bit more detail. Okay. So the first step is to assess your environment. And that involves understanding what apps are being used across the organization today and how prolific their use is. There's several ways to do this. You could take an export of all of your firewall logs and all of your proxy logs. This is arguably a pretty painful method to find out what users are doing. Or we could use an integrated cloud access security broker, CASB service, to deliver an ongoing audit of what apps are being used, who's using those apps, and how much data is being transferred. And this, of course, also helps to drive our user stories to a degree. We can start to understand how users interact with different applications. Of course, we can follow this up with interviews on how the technologies are being used within the business, who these users are collaborating with on these technologies, and what business processes are already integrated into those apps. And then, of course, where can we enhance that experience, or maybe might replace that experience with Microsoft Teams? So we also need to understand the current infrastructure capabilities and the limitations, such as the local office network, the wide area network, the internet circuits. Are they all good enough to deliver a great quality of experience? Have you already conducted a Teams network readiness assessment? And so do you know what Teams is likely to do to your network to ensure that the perception of Teams is good from the get-go? And then, of course, one of the most important tasks is to assess the data before we start migrating it. We need to understand all of the in-scope data sources, the different types of data that are being stored, along with who those collaborators are, and whether this is in scope or out of scope for migration to Teams. Now, clearly, this could be a huge undertaking, depending on the complexity of the environment. So we typically break this down by business unit or department. But the benefits of handling this up front is that you're going to be in control of all of your data when the ICO comes knocking. And then, of course, the other benefit is that if you cleanse your data before you start migrating it, you're not spending time and money on migrating that data if all it really needs is to simply delete it or archive it. And this then feeds into our data classification taxonomy design, which we're going to cover in a couple of steps' time. Okay, so the next step to secure your identities then, and of course the platform that surrounds Teams. The way we do this is through several integrated techniques. First and foremost, does your Office 365 tenant and security practices conform to the current NCSE cloud security guidelines? There are 14 principles that are addressed in those guidelines. And if you implement those or follow those guidelines, that's a quick win straight off the bat for any environment. Typically, NCSE guidelines are followed by public sector, but actually it's good practice for any size or type of organization and delivers a great security posture, which gives you a great defense if there's a breach occurs. Then, of course, we need to ensure the Teams platform itself has been configured appropriately. So what I mean by this is there's a whole raft of security policies, messaging policies, call-in, meeting, app access, and configuration policies that can and should be used to control the environment for the end users. Next, we move on to some of the less obvious ways of protecting your identities. First and foremost, we need to protect Active Directory. Around 90% of organizations are using Active Directory as their source directory service, and AD has an open API by design. So if you're inside the corporate firewall, there's many tools readily available built into every single PC that can be used to potentially attack that AD service. You may well have seen some of the stats going around about attackers typically going undetected within your network for upwards of 200 days. And there's, of course, more than likely at least one breached endpoint in most organizations. Let's face it, it's pretty easy these days to socially engineer your way onto a user's machine. So the traditional security tools that we have, although they all have their purpose, I'm certainly not saying get rid of them. They're not really designed to detect or contain these types of attacks. They can't really detect the difference between what's an attacker and what's a legitimate user. There are some behavioral analytic tools available which will alert after the fact to say this process didn't quite look right, this identity was doing something it doesn't normally do. But fundamentally, that's still happening after you've already been breached. Potentially, your attacker is already changing passwords on some dormant account somewhere. So we do need to make sure that we're not only monitoring that sort of behavior, but any lateral movement attempts across the network are contained. We need to do that right in the middle of the kill chain. So I don't have time to go into that in any more detail today, but please do reach out to us afterwards for more information around what we can do to protect against that. Next, we need to ensure that our synchronized identities are secured through conditional access. Why is that important? Conditional access enables us to use a combination of app, location, device, and identity to request one or more factors of authentication and authorize or not authorize, as the case may be, the user to access those apps and that business data. And of course, we could just block all access from outside the corporate firewall. That's going to work. It's great. But we're still not protected from internal threats. And the net result of that is that we're diminishing the flexibility and the mobility of the team solution, which then impacts the user experience. And ultimately, that's going to lead back to shadow IT. So another way of protecting your identities is to integrate remote browsing techniques. This is where browsing is containerized in a secure sandbox environment, so no malicious content could ever find its way down onto a user's machine. One of the many benefits of Teams, as we've heard, is the fact that it can be the unified interface to many different apps and services. Some of those are going to be web-based. If we're accessing websites through Teams by implementing remote browsing techniques for those unknown categorized websites, we can further protect the environment from any malicious content. So again, please reach out to us to discuss that in more detail. I don't have time to go into that today. Okay, so the next step in this process then is to automate your Teams lifecycle. So automation is a very underutilized but highly flexible and valuable tool in our governance arsenal. By using efficient automation techniques and technologies, we can ensure that all of our processes are carried out in a nice standardized fashion. Why would we bother automating a process? Well, in my view, if we automate the mundane, we're giving users time to innovate, which ultimately helps the business stay relevant. And of course, that's my very high level view and opinion. But to get back on point, why would we bother automating Teams lifecycle? Simply, it's all about controlling and standardizing Teams management. We mentioned earlier that out-of-the-box configuration says that anyone can create a team. If you create that team, you're the owner of that team, and then you can delete the team and potentially all the data that's contained within it. We can address this really simply with a Teams lifecycle automation. The first step in automating the lifecycle is understanding what types of teams we need across the organization. I'm going to run a short demo on this later. But how this works is, let's say we have two types of teams that we need, one for client projects and one for an investment opportunity. We create a template for each type and build out that template with all the channels, all the configuration that we need. We simply then clone that template within our workflows to minimize the effort that we need to provision teams and to ensure that we're getting standardization each and every time. Our first process is usually an approval-led process. So the provisioning process will go through an approval process. What I mean by that is a user is going to request a new team. That's going to go for approval to maybe their line manager, maybe it's a department manager, or maybe it goes to the service desk to get approved, some due diligence run before it then gets provisioned automatically at the back end. Then, of course, we need to deal with those in-life changes. So I'm talking about adding members, removing members, maybe requesting a change of ownership as part of a leavers process. The most regulated organizations will typically automate as much as possible, but they're going to add lots of checks and balances. So those approvals and reviews to ensure that consistency and governance is maintained throughout. So even though the most regulated companies do this, this is going to be beneficial for any organization. You may not necessarily want to add too many hurdles in the process to ensure it's as seamless as possible. But if we do this automation, we can ensure governance of those processes. And then to round this off, we need to deal with the archiving and eventual disposition of a team. So it may be that at the end of an investment opportunity, for example, we need to archive that data, we need to retain it for 5 years, and then we need to just dispose of it at the end. Maybe we need to flag it for a disposition review. So for those that have already deployed Teams, this will likely resonate because probably already experienced a little bit of Teams bloat, maybe some duplication, and using that free-for-all approach maybe doesn't work so well. Maybe it does. For those organizations that haven't deployed Teams yet, this is a great opportunity to get in ahead of the game. So the next step then is to classify your data. We need to make sure we're classifying all of the data as it's migrated into Teams and of course during the life cycle of the data within Teams itself. Why would we bother with that? Classification has huge benefits for the organization from both a security and a compliance stance. And it's beneficial for risk and compliance teams during those times of litigation. So when we're talking about classification of data, we're really talking about either manually or automatically, ideally automatically, scanning that data and classifying it as to what type of data it is. For example, does it contain passport numbers, national insurance numbers, credit card information, driver license numbers, or maybe there's something proprietary that we need to search for and classify appropriately. Once we've classified that data, we then need to label it appropriately. Within Office 365, there's two different types of labels, retention labels and sensitivity labels. These are used for different purposes, which we're going to go through. So let's say we've classified our data as personally identifiable information. So it's got passport information inside it. We could then apply a retention label that retains that data for 1 year, after which time it's marked for disposition review. Why would we do that? So this type of data is somewhat transient and it belongs to an employee. So it's good practice to ensure it's kept up to date. So by flagging this data after a year, our process could be that it's going to go and that we're going to go and check that that data is still required. And if it is required, that it's up to date and then we can act appropriately. And we like to build as much automation into the strategy as possible. So we typically use a default retention policy or default label that is then overridden based on either the content or based on an event happening. So as I mentioned, the other use for labels is for protection. So when we talk about protection of data, we're really talking about putting rights management around it to limit the use of that data. Maybe we're going to limit exporting or copying that data, printing it, or if it's an email, forwarding that email. And of course, we want to make sure we're encrypting that data as well. So if we think about my previous example, we may want to assign a sensitivity label to that document containing passport information, which encrypts the data and limits access to the HR department only. We can then use those same labels with data loss prevention techniques. The label itself is just stored as metadata on the data. And so it travels with the data wherever that happens to go within the cloud estate. So we can protect it at all times. Now, this can even extend to non-Microsoft cloud storage in certain circumstances, and it can even extend to on-premises infrastructure in some circumstances as well. And then finally, on data protection, we mustn't forget the backup. So maybe the default data backup provision within Office 365 and Microsoft 365 is good enough to satisfy your business continuity policy. Maybe it's not. Either way, it needs to be defined, needs to be documented, and you need to have an agreement around that. So again, reach out to us for more information around what is and isn't possible with backups. And then when thinking about some of the data governance capabilities, by classifying and labeling our data, we can retain it for the appropriate amount of time. So we don't want to be keeping data for longer than necessary. That could open us up to unnecessary risk during those times of litigation. We certainly don't want to delete data that must be kept for regulatory reasons. And so a robust retention schedule is required. Then at the end of that period, we can simply purge the data or mark it for disposition review. And that means where a defined group can decide whether that data needs to be deleted or not. Could even use automation to perform event-based retention. To give you an example of that, I've been working with a client recently. They deal with a lot of contractual information. Those contracts need to be kept all the time the contract is alive. But at the end of that contract, the data just needs to be kept for 10 years, then automatically deleted. And within that 10 years, it must be marked as a record so that it cannot be modified and cannot be removed. So what we do is trigger an event at the end of the contract that goes off and relabels everything with a 10-year retention clock. And then finally, the other benefit to classifying your data appropriately is that discovery of that data becomes much easier. So when we're building our e-discovery cases within the data investigations tools within Office 365, by classifying and labeling data, we can search for those labels within the tools themselves, which means if we're sure that we've classified and labeled everything appropriately, we don't necessarily have to run a full index search every single time. And of course, we're likely going to want to run periodic reviews to make sure that we are labeling everything correctly. And again, there's tools that can help with that. Anytime we can reduce the data sets that we're having to send out to our legal team, it's going to potentially reduce the cost of litigation. I've been speaking really about data discovery across Teams and the Microsoft 365 environment. But if you're looking for a single pane discovery tool to return data from multiple data sources across an organization, then there's also some tools available to help with that. I don't have time to go into that today, but please reach out to us for a little bit more information. We can dip into that on an individual basis. And then lastly, in this section, then there's a whole raft of tools available and provided within the platform to assist with data governance. Things such as label analytics to show us where labels are being applied across the organization, through to the e-discovery portal where data investigations can be led. This allows us to walk through the process of running a data investigation, right from content searches through to litigation holds on those data sets, moving that data into evidence lockers, and then reviewing and redacting that data within the locker, and of course then exporting that data for external review or shipping to legal counsel maybe. We can then keep logs of our audits and get quick access to the Microsoft external audits through Compliance Manager. So I've really only had time to just brush the surface of capabilities on this webinar. So again, please do reach out for more information. Okay, so the final and arguably one of the most important steps in delivering secure and compliant teamwork is to engage your users. This has to be done right from the start when we're planning the user adoption strategy, building out the plan, and understanding those user stories and use cases. We need to understand what we're going to be marketing to the business and when we're going to be marketing it to the business, because we can't roll this stuff all out at once. Now, this may involve workshops or interviews, or maybe spending time with users to understand how they work, which tools they use for what tasks, and how we want to migrate those into the team's environment. We need to ensure that we're building a robust awareness campaign to ensure that people understand not only that these new ways of working are coming, but why? What's in it for them? Why should they care about security and compliance? When it comes to security compliance, it's not enough just to run training sessions. We need to ensure that we're delivering easy to consume relevant content that goes beyond technical training. So for example, what could a social engineering attack look like? How does a social engineer use a seemingly innocuous piece of information to compromise an entire organization? What could the ramifications be if that happens? And why you really shouldn't give out information to anybody unless you know them or you have authorization to do so. It may be completely legitimate, but it really only takes one compromise, one piece of information to compromise an entire organization. So to get back onto Teams though, we need to ensure the awareness campaign builds desire to use the new tool sets, which will only really happen with the right levels of engagement, and use feature champions to drive adoption and ease the integration of these new ways of working. So user engagement is an ongoing initiative. It's not a one and done approach. If we treat it as a one and done approach, we're going to slowly slip back into those old habits. What we're trying to do here is encourage the fostering of new habits focused around Teams usage. If we follow these few simple guidelines, then this leads to fewer occurrences of shadow IT, hopefully, and because we're delivering a secure and compliant team working platform for users to consume from anywhere, anytime, and from any device. So I'd like to show you a short demo now of what I've been talking about around the automation piece. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is log into the portal. So I'm logging in as Megan today. You can see this is going to let me straight into the portal. So I've allowed my environment to just let me in. No multi-factor authentication at this point. But if I now go and launch Microsoft Teams, I've set up conditional access to ask for a second factor. And in this case, I'm going to use my mobile device to perform that second factor and allow me into the Teams environment. Okay, so once we're in Teams, we can see that I've got a few teams connected on the left-hand side already, all for different purposes, and these are the ones that I happen to be joined to. But I've got one at the top, which is an organization-wide team for my business, Contoso. And we've got a channel called Contoso Resources, where we're driving all of our users to go and create new things and access the different tool sets that we're going to have available. In here, we've got a tab, which is taking us to a new form, which is going to allow users to create a new Teams request. So if I click on new, this is going to open up quite a basic form that I've created here just to gather some initial information for the team itself. So we can give it a title, we can give it a template, a description, and then add the various members. And when we add the members, it's just going to do a lookup into Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. So I'm actually not going to fill out this form from here because I want to show you how this could work from a mobile experience. And what I've done is created just a basic Teams app or Power App, which is going to allow me to create that form and allow users to request the new team from pretty much anywhere. So if I go ahead and launch that app, you can see this is quite a basic app, but I've got two buttons on there, one to create a new team and one to view a team. So if I go and view a team, this is going to show me all the teams that currently exist in my environment. But actually what I want to do now is just create a new one. Let's click on that button. And we're going to give this a title. So let's call this project 87546. And we're going to give it a nice description. This is a team to collaborate on project 87546. And let's just get that right. There we go. Choose a template. Now in this case, I'm going to choose project because this is a project. You can add as many templates as you want. We can select if this is private or not, depending on whether you want anyone to be able to join themselves. And then we just click on the members and add our members. So I'm going to add Megan in this example, and I'm also going to add Alex as well. And there we go. So let's just add Alex in. There we go. And click on the checkbox at the top. And that's now submitted that request. And that's going through an approval process. Let's go and view this request and search for my project. Just in the search bar, still doing this from the mobile device. And open that up and have a look at the request. And we can see that that is now pending approval. And those are all the details that I filled in. So let's jump back to the approvers view. So in this case, my administrator is the approver, but it could be, as I said, the line manager or department manager, whoever it needs to be. And in this case, I'm doing this through email, but you could do this through the Flow app, which gives you a slightly different and arguably better experience. Within the email, though, I can see all of the information of who's requested this team, a little bit of information on the detail, and I can now go and evaluate the team request, just make sure that it's correct. This is going to take me into that form. I can make sure everything is good, do my due diligence, I can change anything that I need to change. And once I'm happy with that, then I can go back and approve that request. So let's close that window down. And let's jump back and approve the request. And of course, it's good practice to put in a nice descriptive approval. So I'm going to tell everyone that this has been approved and put my initials in there so they know that I'm approving it. That's going to show up in our audit trails. So once that's then been approved, what's going to happen at the back end is that's going to be automatically provisioned because I'm only requesting one level of approval for this. So let's come out of this and go back into the user base. You may have just seen a pop-up in the bottom right-hand corner telling me that I've been joined to a new team. But let's refresh this screen and just check what's happening there. So we can see at the bottom, there's my new team, and it was approved. So this has now been created for me. So if I go back to the main Teams interface, we can see that there's the team at the bottom, and there's my channels all pre-created. So I haven't had to go through and create those channels myself. They're all pre-created based on the template and based on the settings that we set up in that template itself. The idea here is that we're standardizing how teams are created. And that's not to say that you can't then go and add channels and add tabs and add these applications to that team environment. Absolutely, you can if we allow it to be done. But we're standardizing the creation. And of course, just to show you there, I don't have a delete option. So even though I'm arguably the owner of that team, I can't delete the data. So it is now protected. So the next thing I wanted to show you then was around the classification. So I've got a team here called commercial lending, and I've got a channel called risk. I'm going to jump into the files section of the risk channel, and I'm going to open that up in the SharePoint view just to show you a little bit more information around classification. So you can see I've got some data in here already, and there's a retention label column with the label of confidential. Now with that label of confidential, that means in my environment that it's kept for 7 years. So if I try and delete that file, I'm just going to get an error message saying this data cannot be deleted. I mean, you can read the error message there. So my data is protected. So that's great, but what about if I create new data? So in this environment, in this library, I've created 2 templates. one for a subject access request and one for a risk assessment. I'm going to open up the risk assessment. Now, this isn't just a blank Word document now, this is a templated Word document. So all of the form information is already filled out, but I'm going to give this one a new name. I'm going to relate this back to my project that we've been working on through this demo. And I'm going to add a little bit of content in there as well, just for good measure. But the important point here is I haven't had to create all of this from scratch. I'm pre-provisioning those templates. So again, reducing the amount of work that the user has to do. So once I've added my content, let's just close that down. This is going to auto-save, and we can see that that piece of data already has been classified as confidential. So I'm automating that classification process, which means the user doesn't have to think about what they're trying to do. Now, we want users to think, absolutely, but we want to make it as easy as possible for them as well. And then because I've labeled that as confidential, I can wrap my data loss prevention techniques around it. So let's go and have a look at this piece of data and the properties on it. I can see that I can't share this information externally because it is potentially sensitive. So again, protecting that data right out of the box. So let's go and actually try it. So I'm going to try and share this piece of data with an external user. So I'm just going to add in david.tennant@gmail.com. Now, it's probably not his real email address, but you get the idea. It's an external email address. And right within the interface, the system is telling me that I cannot share this data externally because it's potentially sensitive. Now, we can add some overrules and some justifications in there if we want to allow users to override that. But again, we're protecting that data, which is all driven from the classification of the data and the labeling of that data in the first place. So, okay, so that's all I wanted to show you on the demo. The key takeaway really is to start simple and don't try to do everything at once. Deliver a program of changes to step to the desired behavior. And if you do nothing else really, then automate your team's lifecycle. That is really beneficial and really, really important. So if what we've been talking about today has resonated, then please do get into contact with us and we can dip in a bit deeper around any of these topics, whether it's Teams itself, workflow, remote browsing, malicious process isolation, or of course the data governance capabilities. And at that point, I'd like to hand back over to Danny. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Liam. I think everyone's giving you a virtual high five alongside your other speaker screaming in the background. No, fantastic. And again, yeah, thanks, Liam. To be able to do that from the services, we had very, very little dropout. And I can imagine with all those people looking on, it must have been a little bit more stressful. So well done, mate. That was fantastic. Again, thank you to Robert Yangerett for his update around Teams. Again, fantastically interesting, hearing some more about not just the features and functionality, but how things like AI sit in the background with Teams, how effective it is, and how obviously it's changing the way that we collaborate and work together. Now, what is the next steps? So, in terms of this webinar, it has been recorded. Now, as this is a BITE-specific webinar that we've run today, there will be an e-shot that comes out after this event, clarification around the webinar and its recording, and also giving you an idea of what to do with those next steps. Now, as we've already discussed, or Liam's alluded to, there was an awful lot covered today, really only scratching the surface of Teams, and a lot of what needs to be considered from your team sprawl, duplication, data loss, but then right the way through into things like app and data, identity, automation, classification, erasure, searching, and a number of other elements. So in terms of next steps, there are really two offerings, if you like, to really start that process that are already factored or out of the box. The first is the Teams current state assessment. Again, this is where a consultant will look to review your existing Teams configuration, looking at some of the things that Liam's touched on there. Again, that sort of Teams sprawl, how it's been used, user adoption, then look into some of the security practices that you either do or don't have in place. Again, if it's just been turned on, or indeed if you've actually put any of those controls in. Again, then you have the data governance. And then lastly is actually then to provide what our findings are, give some recommendations around how you can best enable teams and fully utilize it, and what will be the next steps for you. So that's really the sort of entry level. And again, it doesn't take an awful lot of time, but the findings and recommendations that come out of that are obviously quite detailed and will typically then lead on to either an in-house project or indeed assistance from us. Then you have the lifecycle automation that Liam's touched on. Again, it's going through those process workflows, using that automation. So as you can see, some of the things that we were doing in on and around both the demo, around provisioning, the in-life or real-world changes that happen with teams, and then on to areas around the data, including archival. So as we say, we're going to be communicating the video. We're going to be giving you those the ability to come back and contact us. So all that's really left for me to do is to thank everyone. So thank you very much to Bytes for enabling us to provide this to their client base, for the fantastic facilities that we've had here. It's great to be part of this organisation. The partnership that we've got is one that's been in place a long time, but it's constantly evolving, and we're incredibly proud to be part of that. Thank you to VM for the presentation, as we say. Fantastic to be able to do that from where you were sat. To Robert Yan as well. And from me, so I'm the Practice Director for Management Support Services over at bluesource. We thank you very much for joining, and we look forward to hopefully speaking to you soon.